fire, a man was burning in the dark, and the 13-year-old girl stood 3 steps away, both hands raised, unable to remember what she had just done. A scream tore across the field. No one came. The flames climbed higher, staining the whole sky red, throwing the girl's shadow across the ground like something that had just woken and could never be swallowed back down. Then, darkness. 13 years. Now she stood at the end of a line of women, wrapped head to toe in heavy black wool, waiting to be sold, her hood pulled low. Nothing about her chosen to be seen. The great doors opened, the kind that hadn't been opened at full width since the last coronation. The cold rolled in ahead of the footsteps, snuffing out every torch it passed. A tall figure stopped in front of her. 3,000 people stopped breathing. I'll take her. The mating auction was held on the last Friday of every month. No fanfare. No flowers. Just a raised wooden platform in the Great Hall of Ashenville's administrative district, torches burning on iron brackets, and a row of women who had run out of other options. Wren had run out of options a long time ago. She stood at the far end of the line. Hood pulled low, gloves on. Every inch of her covered in dark wool so heavy it was almost armor. The woman beside her had spent an hour on her hair, borrowed pins, a powder that softened the shadows under her eyes. Careful work, all of it. The work of someone who understood she was being evaluated and had decided to meet that evaluation with everything she had. The one beside that wore a gown borrowed from a cousin. Pale blue, too tight across the shoulders, chosen because it matched her eyes. A small, hopeful calculation. The kind you make when hope is the only currency you have left. Wren wore nothing chosen to be seen. That was the point. Around her, the hall was filling. Merchants who needed someone to run a household. Minor nobility looking for a second wife with fewer opinions than the first. A widower from the Eastern District who came to these auctions every season and left alone every time. Which told you something about him that nobody ever said out loud, because saying it would require acknowledging that everyone in the room understood it. The crowd pressed in. Voices layered over each other like something alive and slightly desperate. The way crowds always sounded when they were gathered around something they found both uncomfortable and irresistible. She didn't look up. There was no reason to. She had spent 16 years inside Lord Casvin's house, learning to make herself unremarkable, learning to occupy space without claiming it, learning to exist in a room without becoming part of the room's story. It was a skill, an unglamorous one, the kind of skill that left no visible record of itself. But she had developed it to a degree that most people never had to, and she had learned to find a certain cold comfort in the proficiency. If she was chosen today, fine. She would make it work. She had made worse things work. She had survived 16 years under the same roof as a man who considered her existence an insult to his dignity, which required a specific kind of endurance that most people never had to develop, and she had developed into something close to an art form. If she wasn't chosen today, her father had made the alternative very clear: slavery. Legally arranged, with paperwork. Witnessed and stamped and filed in triplicate in the administrative offices on the 2nd floor of the very building she was standing in right now, which she found grimly efficient as a detail. He'd said it the way someone says we're having lamb for dinner. Casual, faintly bored. As if the inconvenience wasn't the outcome itself. The inconvenience was having to arrange it at all. Having to spend an afternoon on the paperwork. Having to explain it to the necessary officials. The actual result, his daughter sold into legal bondage, was not the inconvenient part. That was the resolution. That was the thing he was looking forward to. This is fine, Wren told herself. This is fine. This is fine. This is perfectly. The great doors opened, not the side doors that servants used. Not the rear entrance for latecomers who had misjudged the time and arrived with apologies and disheveled clothing. The great doors. The ones that hadn't been opened at full width since the last coronation, because opening them at full width required 6 men on each side, and a reason significant enough to justify the effort and the spectacle. Whatever reason walked through them now, it justified both. Wren felt it before she saw anything. Pressure. That was the only word for it. A presence rolling through the hall like a wave rolling through shallow water, not violent, not aggressive, just vast, displacing everything in its path. Moving through resistance as though resistance were a suggestion rather than a physical fact. Every conversation in the hall died mid-sentence. Every head turned. Every body shifted, unconsciously, away from the center of the room, Even the auctioneer stopped. This was a man so professionally unflappable that he had once continued his recitation while two bidders came to actual blows at the back of the room. A chair was broken, and someone's nose was bleeding. He'd kept going through all of it. His voice hadn't wavered. Now his mouth was open and nothing was coming out. Alpha King Aldrich of Grayfen walked into the hall. He was tall. That was the first thing, and it was inescapable. Tall in a way that wasn't just height but proportion, the kind of frame that made every doorway he passed through look like it had been built with mild optimism about the average. Blonde hair, longer than current fashion dictated, pulled back from a face that noble women across 3 kingdoms had reportedly written extremely poor poetry about. Eyes the pale gray of winter sky in the specific hour before snow, when the light goes flat and everything gets very still and you know something is coming. Cold, that was the second thing. And not metaphorically cold. Not the coldness of manner or expression, though those were present too. Actual, physical cold. Even across the crowded hall, from under her heavy hood, Ren could feel the temperature drop as he moved through the room. Like standing near a window left open in December. Like stone floors before the fires are lit in the morning. Like the specific cold of something that lived at a lower temperature than the world around it and had always lived that way. He walked like the room belonged to him. Which it did. Technically, everything in Ashenvale and most things beyond it belonged to him in one legal sense or another. But entitlement was the wrong word for what she was watching. Entitlement had a quality of asserting, of staking a claim. This was different. He simply moved through the space the way water moves through its own container, not pushing, not performing, just occupying what was already his by the nature of things, not rushing, not performing, just certain. He paused at the edge of the platform. His gray eyes swept the line of women slowly, without urgency, with the exact, unhurried quality of a man completing a task he had already thought through at significant length and didn't expect to be surprised by. He moved to the first woman. The one with the borrowed pins in her hair, a long pause. His expression revealed nothing, absolutely nothing. The kind of practiced, complete blankness that took years to develop and cost something real to maintain. He moved on, the woman with the borrowed blue gown. Another pause. Another moment of that cold, thorough consideration that looked like assessment and felt, from the outside, like something considerably more complicated. He moved on. The pregnant woman near the center, who stood with her chin lifted and her hands curved protective and deliberate over her belly. Another pause, longer this time. Something moved briefly in his expression, not pity, not judgment. Something closer to recognition, as if he'd seen that particular courage before and knew what it cost. Then he moved on anyway. Ren kept her eyes on the floor. She could track his footsteps by sound alone. Even through the crowd noise, which had dropped to a tense, collective whisper, everyone holding their breath, nobody willing to risk missing whatever this was, she could follow him. Heavy boots on stone, deliberate, spaced with the precision of a man who had decided exactly how fast he intended to move and saw no reason to revise. Getting closer. Don't look up, she told herself. Don't move. Don't draw attention. Don't. The footsteps stopped. Directly in front of her, the silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever experienced in her life. 3,000 people simultaneously choosing not to breathe. The torches crackled. Somewhere near the back of the hall, someone's chair scraped stone, and the sound traveled the entire length of the room like a shot. She could see his boots from under her hood. Black leather, worn at the edges in ways that suggested a man who actually went places and did things rather than someone who dressed for the impression of doing things. She could see the hem of his coat. Dark wool. Good cut. No ornamentation whatsoever. No embroidery, no decoration, nothing that announced itself. Just quality so obvious it didn't need to announce anything. Nobody breathed, and then, cutting through the silence like something sharp and entirely final, "I'll take her," 3 words, flat, certain, completely without fanfare, which was itself a kind of fanfare. The hall erupted. Ren stood very still and thought, "He means me. He definitely means me. There is no one else standing directly in front of him right now. He means me. He is simply standing there, saying it like it was already decided before he walked through the doors. Which means he decided it before he walked through the doors. Which means, why does he mean me? Why me specifically? What is this?" She didn't have answers. She didn't move. She stood in the noise and the chaos and the press of 1,000 whispered questions, and she thought, file it away. You'll understand it later. You always understand things later. They signed the contract the following morning. The council chamber had a long table and too many windows letting in the gray winter light, and the particular chill of a room maintained at a temperature specifically calculated to keep everyone inside it, alert and slightly uncomfortable. Which was, Wren concluded within 30 seconds of entering, the entire architectural point of the space. Discomfort as policy, cold as a management tool, Lord Casvin was already there when she arrived. He stood at the far end of the table, with a glass of something in his hand, wearing the expression he always wore in public. Composed faintly magnanimous, the portrait of a reasonable man who held only reasonable concerns about reasonable things. He didn't look at her when she entered. He never looked at her directly if he could help it. He'd spent years perfecting the art of making her feel invisible in rooms full of people, and he had brought that art to its highest possible refinement. He practiced it the way dedicated men practiced other skills, consistently, with attention to technique, with visible pride in his competence. What was not normal this morning was the slight tension visible in his jaw, the way his eyes moved toward the door each time it opened or seemed about to open, the smallest tremor in the hand that held the glass. Barely visible. But there, Lord Casvin was afraid of something. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, quietly, without reaction, without letting it register anywhere on the surface of her face. Or rather, on her hood, since her face wasn't currently visible. A small mercy that the hood let her observe without being observed in return. It was the one advantage the thing gave her, and she had learned to use it. Aldrich arrived last. He sat at the head of the table with the efficiency of someone who had occupied a very large number of important chairs and had stopped finding the act notable in any way. 2 advisors flanked him, both of them carrying documents they shuffled with the nervous energy of men who understood that being present in this particular room on this particular morning was something they would be prescribing to people for the rest of their lives. His eyes moved to Wren immediately, or rather, to the hood where her face should have been. A brief, entirely dispassionate acknowledgement that she was there. Then straight to business. The terms are straightforward, he said. Not to his advisors. To her, directly. I'll summarize them myself. One of the advisors cleared his throat in a preparatory way. Aldrich did not look at him. First, he leaned forward slightly, forearms coming to rest on the table with the quiet precision of a man who had decided exactly how he intended to occupy this space and was executing that decision. I will never look upon you. Neither will any member of my household, my court, or any person employed by or affiliated with my staff. You will be veiled if you choose, or not. That decision belongs entirely and permanently to you. Wren blinked beneath the hood. She blinked again. That was not the opening she had spent the previous night preparing herself for. She had prepared for examination, for demands, for the specific indignity of being assessed by someone who had already decided what they thought of her before she'd said a word. She had prepared for all of that. She had not prepared for this second. You will give me an heir, preferably more than one, for the stability of the succession. Beyond that specific requirement, we will not share a life. We will not share meals or time or conversation beyond what is strictly necessary for the formal functions of the court. He paused to let that settle. You will attend perhaps 3 or 4 royal functions per year to maintain appropriate appearances before visiting dignitaries and the assembled court. That is the full extent of my expectations. He set the document on the table and slid it toward her with 2 fingers. The marriage will be contractual only. You will want for nothing material. But I want nothing from you beyond what is written in that document. Silence. Casvin made a sound, almost a protest. His mouth opened. You're the witness, Aldrich said. He hadn't looked at Casvin, didn't look at him now. Not a participant. Casvin's mouth closed. That jaw tension again, more visible this time. Wren looked at the document. Then at the king. Is this agreeable to you? Aldrich asked. The question was directed at her with the same flat, precise quality as everything he'd said so far. No condescension, no impatience, no performance of asking while already having decided. Just asking. With the evident expectation that her answer was the variable that mattered, the one that would determine what happened next, she thought. He's actually asking me. As though my answer is the thing that changes what comes after this. When was the last time that was true about anything? Yes, she said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected, which surprised her enough that she nearly lost the steadiness entirely. It's more than agreeable, Your Majesty. Something shifted in his expression, very small, almost imperceptible unless you were paying extremely careful attention to his face, which she was. More than agreeable, he repeated. Yes, to a marriage in which your husband wants nothing to do with you. Yes. She held what she could see of his gaze through the fabric between them. It is more than I have been given before. She hadn't meant to say it, the specific truth of it. She had absolutely meant to say it. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than moments of that kind usually lasted. Then he shook his head, not in disagreement, not in dismissal, but in the small, involuntary way of a man who has encountered something he hadn't accounted for in his calculations, and returned his attention to the contract. Sign here, she signed. Casvin signed as witness with a hand that shook in a way he clearly did not want anyone to notice and that everyone at the table noticed immediately. Both advisors signed. The thing was done. She was going to be queen. She turned that sentence over in her mind and found it surreal from every angle she tried, and yet there it was. True regardless of how surreal it felt. True regardless of how little sense it made. True because she had signed her name at the bottom of a document, and the king across the table had signed his name too. And two men with official stamps had added their names, and now it was simply a fact in the world. On her way out of the chamber, Casvin moved close enough to speak without being overheard. You've made a mistake, he said, barely audible. Not to her specifically. To himself or to some internal accounting he was conducting. As if she were simply a variable in an equation that had produced an unexpected result. She kept walking. She stored it away with everything else. She was very good at storing things. They almost made it out of the east wing without incident. Almost. Isolde caught her in the corridor 20 feet from the main staircase. Isolde was 2 years older, 3 inches taller, and possessed of the kind of beauty that required very little active effort and an enormous quantity of genetic luck. The sort of beauty that simply existed, rather than being achieved or maintained. She wore pale green. Her hair was arranged in the effortless way of someone for whom such things were effortless. Her expression, however, was doing none of those easy, composed things. You can't do this, Isolde said. Ren kept walking. Ren. Isolde stepped directly into her path. Stop. Look at me, I'm going to be late for the... You killed him. The words landed in the corridor like something thrown hard against stone. Blunt, final, certain. Garrett is dead because of you. Because of what you are. And now you're going to walk into the most powerful house in this kingdom and pretend to be something you aren't. And when it comes apart, and it will come apart, it will be worse than anything that would have happened to you here. Ren stopped. She stood very still. Don't react. Don't give her anything she can use as purchase. Don't. When the king discovers what's under that hood, Isolde said. Quieter now. The quietness somehow worse than the volume had been. He won't simply dissolve the marriage. You know what this kingdom does to witches. You know exactly what they do. I know what they do. Then you know what you're risking. I know exactly what I'm risking. Ren looked at her sister. Through the hood, through the dim corridor light. Through 3 years of accusation that had never been spoken at trial, because there had never been a trial. Just a verdict in her family's eyes, rendered without deliberation and served without end. What I'm risking is considerably better than what I'm running from. Isolde's face did something complicated. Pain and anger and grief and something else. Something that looked, briefly, like uncertainty, pressing against each other all at once. You could have let him go, she said. Something ragged under the words now. The composure fraying. He chose me, not you. He had already chosen me and he was going to leave with me, and you could have let him go. You could have, I know. Then why? I don't know. The words came out scraped thin. Honest, in the specific way things become honest when you have stopped seeing any value in defending yourself. When the defense costs more than whatever it's protecting. Isolde. I genuinely don't know what happened that night. I was angry. The fire, I have never been able to control it properly, not once, not even close. I was angry, and then he was. She stopped, made herself breathe. I don't remember the middle part clearly. I don't know what I did. I don't know what happened, silence. That's not an answer, Isolde said. No, Ren agreed. It's not. She walked around her sister and continued toward the staircase. She didn't look back. She kept her hand still until she'd turned the corner and put a wall between herself and Isolde's face, and then she let them shake, briefly, before she brought them back under control. I don't know what happened that night. That was the thing. The actual worst of it. Not the accusation. Not the unofficial trial that had run in her family's eyes for 3 years, with a verdict that had never needed a courtroom. Not even the brand on her forehead. The cross-shaped mark pressed into her skin by an official she'd never met, designating her dangerous and bound and worth monitoring. The worst part was that Isolde might be right, and Ren might never know for certain whether she was or wasn't. She carried that uncertainty the way she carried everything, quietly, without showing it, adding it to the collection of things she carried. The wedding was held 6 days later. The cathedral in Ashenville's center district had been built 3 centuries ago by a king with something substantial to prove, and the building had been making that proof ever since. It could hold 3,000 people, and it held all of them on this particular morning. Plus several hundred more standing in the sidewall galleries and in the overflow space near the main entrance, pressed together with the focused anticipation of people who had rearranged their schedules for something that had never happened before. A king choosing a veiled woman from a mating auction was, by any reasonable measure, unprecedented. People had opinions about unprecedented things. They came from distances to witness them. Ren rode to the cathedral in a closed carriage. Outside, she could hear the crowd. Thousands of voices layered into something that had the quality of weather, like wind before a storm, rising and irregular, and full of things you couldn't quite separate into individual words. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and thought, "You have survived worse things than being looked at. You have survived considerably worse than this. You can survive being walked down an aisle. The carriage stopped. The door opened. She stepped down into cold morning air, and the sound hit her. Not hostile, not cruel, just enormous. The specific enormity of that many people directing their collective attention at a single point in space, which happened to be the point where she was standing. She kept her eyes forward and walked. The cathedral entrance was built to make people feel small. It succeeded completely. Inside, candlelight threw gold across 300 years of stone wall. The pews packed with silk and velvet and jewels catching the flame, with the particular held breath stillness of people watching for something they'd specifically arranged to see. At the altar, Aldrich stood in black. Of course he did. He watched her walk toward him with the same expression he'd worn at the contract table. Blank, controlled, giving away absolutely nothing, which was itself a kind of statement. The statement of someone who had decided what they were giving away and what they weren't, and had made that decision with full awareness. She took her place beside him. He is very tall, she thought, with the helpless specificity of a mind that had decided to notice irrelevant things at significant moments. That is genuinely a very tall man standing immediately next to me right now, the priest began. Ren heard approximately 30% of the words with any sustained attention. The other 70% of her awareness was occupied with the cold radiating from the man beside her. Actual, physical, unmistakable cold, in a cathedral packed with bodies and hundreds of burning candles, and the accumulated warmth of thousands of people breathing in an enclosed stone space for the past hour. He felt like standing next to an open window. In January, on a windless day when the cold had nowhere to go and simply accumulated, alpha wolves ran hot. This was documented. This was consistent. This was simply biological fact. They burned through food faster, ran warmer, were the last people in any room to reach for a coat. They couldn't stand summer heat. They were furnaces. Aldrich felt like the single exception to a rule that had never previously had exceptions. Something is wrong with him, she thought. Something is wrong, and he knows it, and he's managing it alone. Do you, the priest said, take this woman to be your wife, your queen, your mate? Aldrich's voice was steady. Completely, deliberately, carefully steady. I do. Then he turned to her and leaned slightly closer, just enough that what he said next would reach her and not the first 3 pews. I will never love you, he said quietly. Not cruel, not a threat, not even unkind, exactly, informational. The precision of a man who believed that clarity was its own form of mercy and had decided to offer it. Please understand that clearly, she looked at him. Or looked at the place where his eyes were, through the fabric of her veil. I understand. Your Majesty, do you? Something behind the gray, doubt or guilt, or something more complicated than either, truly? Yes, she meant it completely, and I need you to understand something in return. A pause. I'm not expecting love. I'm expecting not to be afraid anymore. Those are different things. He looked at her for a moment, then straightened, returned his attention to the priest, the rings. He took her hand and she gasped, silently, but the shock of it traveled through her entire body from the point of contact outward like a current. His hands were cold. Not cool the way hands got on a cold morning. Cold the way hands got when something was wrong at a level below the visible, when the body was doing something it shouldn't have to do to maintain basic function. He slid the ring onto her finger with practiced precision and released her hand. You may kiss your bride, the priest said. 3,000 people stopped breathing simultaneously. This was the moment. The thing they had all rearranged their schedules to witness. The question everyone in the kingdom had been asking, what was under the veil? The king would lift it now. He had to. Tradition, ceremony. The weight of 3,000 people's expectation pressing forward like a physical force. Aldrich turned to her. Will you not look at me? She whispered. He studied her veiled face. Do you want me to? No. Then I won't. He took her hand, lifted it slowly and deliberately, pressed his lips to her gloved knuckles, cold, precise, brief, entirely deliberate, and released her. The crowd noise that followed was extraordinary. Not applause. Something more confused and more human than applause. 3,000 people simultaneously recalibrating their understanding of what they had just witnessed, the sound of that recalibration spreading outward through the cathedral like a wave. But Ren stood frozen. He kissed my hand. He could have demanded to see my face. He had 3,000 witnesses, centuries of tradition, and the full weight of social expectation available as leverage. He could have used any of it, all of it. He had every right to, and no one would have questioned him. He didn't use any of it. Thank you, she thought. She didn't say it. But she thought it so clearly and with such complete sincerity that she almost wondered, for one unreasonable second, whether he could hear it. He couldn't, probably. The castle was larger than she had imagined it. She had imagined it as very large. She had been substantially wrong about the degree. They gave her a suite in the east wing. 3 rooms, all of them bigger than any space she had lived in before, with high windows looking over a garden currently stripped bare by wind. Every piece of furniture sized for someone who expected to be comfortable in it as a matter of course rather than a matter of luck. A team of blind servants arrived within hours of her quiet, careful request and didn't make her ask twice or explain the reason for the request. They simply arrived and began their work with the efficiency of people who had been specifically selected for a specific task. She ate dinner alone. She sat by the fire and looked at the flames and thought about nothing in particular, and everything simultaneously, which is the particular mental state of someone who has had a very large thing happen and hasn't processed it yet, and isn't sure when or how that processing would begin. The terms were clear. She understood the terms. They were signed and stamped and real. He would come when it was practical for the succession, and leave when the relevant requirement had been addressed. And they would be, in every meaningful sense, strangers who shared a name and a legal document and eventually an heir. That was fine. That was fine. She had agreed to exactly that. She had signed her name at the bottom of a document that said exactly that. She was fine, it's fine. 3 soft knocks at the door made her jump approximately 6 inches off the chair. Come in, she managed. Aldrich stepped inside. The first thing she registered, incongruously, given everything, was that he looked different without the formal coat. Not smaller, just more present, more specifically himself. White shirt, unlaced at the throat. Hair slightly displaced, like someone who had been running their hands through it. The particular look of a man who has done the same calculation 12 or 15 times in a row and keeps arriving at an answer he finds unsatisfying. He closed the door. The room, which had seemed a reasonable size before he entered it, was now somewhat smaller. He looked around the suite briefly, then at her, or at the veil. I brought this. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a strip of black silk, clean. Folded once. Folded with the care of someone who had thought about what they were doing. A blindfold. If you're concerned, I might see you accidentally. In the dark, Ren looked at the silk. He went and found a blindfold. He thought about this specific thing, this specific concern I might have, This specific way the evening might become difficult for me, and he addressed it before I had to say anything about it, before it even became a problem, without being asked. "All right," she said softly. "Turn around." He turned. She crossed the room and rose onto her toes to reach his height. This close, she could see things that distance had kept from her. The individual lines of tension along his jaw. A small scar at the corner of his mouth. Old and neat, the kind that came from something quick and precise rather than something sustained. The faint blue-gray cast to his skin at his temples. Not a bruise, not a shadow. Something she didn't have a name for yet, but was already filing away. Something inside him was cold at the level of the bone. She tied the blindfold. Her fingers worked at the back of his head, and in the process brushed against his hair, softer than she'd expected, which was an observation she immediately told herself to stop having. She tied it and stepped back. The last candle went out. Complete darkness. The fire had burned low, its light insufficient. Nothing now but sound, her own breathing, faster than she would have liked, and his, which was deliberate, and even in the specific way of someone who was actively making it deliberate and even. "I can hear your heart," he said quietly. I know. She could feel it herself. Too loud. Inconveniently prominent. That's embarrassing. It's honest. A brief pause. Something in his voice she couldn't name yet. I find honesty considerably easier to work with than the alternative. His hands rose in the darkness, slowly, giving her every opportunity in the world to move back, before they settled on her shoulders with a care that made her throat tighten, in a way she wasn't prepared for, cold. His hands were large and genuinely cold against her bare skin. But he didn't move. He just held her there. Shoulders, the curve of them, thumbs resting at her collarbones, and stood in the dark with the patience of someone who understood that patience was the most useful thing he could offer at this particular moment. He'd identified the most useful thing and was offering it without being asked. He's being careful with me, she thought. He doesn't know anything real about me. He chose me for his own reasons, and he doesn't know anything true about me at all. And he's being careful. She made herself stop analyzing it and just be in it. In the dark, Tacho became the only information available. She reached for him, found the hem of his shirt, felt the solid reality of him under her hands, the breadth of his shoulders, the muscles that shifted as she found her way. His skin was cool and smooth over something real and present. His heart was beating fast. Significantly, noticeably faster than his controlled voice and deliberate breathing would have suggested. Fast enough to tell her that whatever composure he was maintaining on the outside was costing him something. She found that unexpectedly, specifically reassuring. He was holding himself to a careful pace. Not because he felt nothing, because he felt something and had decided to be careful with it. Careful with me, she thought again. "I'm going to kiss you," he said. His voice had changed, lower, rougher at the edges. "If that's yes," she said, before he could finish. His mouth found hers in the darkness, cool lips, soft, moving against hers with a patience that seemed constitutionally impossible for a man who ran an entire kingdom, but that he was bringing here with complete commitment. Not what she'd imagined, or rather, exactly what she'd imagined, but entirely real rather than theoretical. And real, it turned out, was different in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. She stepped closer without deciding to. And the moment their bodies pressed together, they both went still. His arms came around her. The contrast of temperatures, his cool skin, the warmth her body produced as if in instinctive response to his proximity, created something she had no previous experience of and no adequate words for. He made a sound against her mouth, low, not entirely controlled. The first sound she'd heard from him that wasn't controlled. He's warming, she realized. Or rather, she was warming him, and he had noticed, much later, both of them quiet in the dark. His arm came around her in the automatic, unthinking way of a man whose body made a choice before the decision-making part of him had been consulted, before it had been asked, before it had had any say in the matter at all. Ren lay very still. She didn't move, didn't breathe loudly, didn't do anything that might make him aware of what he'd done, because awareness might lead to reconsideration, and she didn't want him to reconsider. His breathing slowed, deepened, moved into sleep with the gradual inevitability of someone who had not been sleeping well for some time and had temporarily run out of resistance. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling she couldn't see, and thought about a man who had brought a blindfold because he'd considered her comfort, about a specific thing, and addressed it without being asked. Who had kissed her hand in front of 3,000 people, rather than demand what tradition entitled him to demand. Whose heart had been beating fast even when his voice stayed level. Cold over cruelty, she had told herself at the contract table. I will choose cold over cruelty every time. Cold is enough, but his arm was around her, real and there. His breathing was slow and steady against her neck, and she was not sure cold was the right word for any of this anymore. She didn't have a better one yet. She would find one eventually. She was patient. She had been patient for 26 years. She could be patient about a word. He came back the next evening, and the one after that, not every night. Not at first. There was a pattern to it. 2 evenings, then a gap of 3 days, then 3 evenings in a row, then nothing for 4 days. And Ren learned to stop tracking the gaps and focus only on the evenings that actually happened. Because the evenings that happened were becoming something. She didn't have the right word yet. She was still working on it, the way you work on a word that keeps almost arriving and then not quite getting there. He never announced himself differently. 3 knocks. Same rhythm every time. Like he'd chosen the rhythm on the first night and seen no reason to vary it. A decision, made once, held to thereafter. She always said, "Come in." She always had the fire going when she heard his footsteps in the corridor. She told herself this was coincidence. It was not coincidence. They talked. That was the part she hadn't anticipated and couldn't quite explain using the terms of what they were supposed to be. The contract had specified almost no shared time. 3 or 4 royal functions per year, the minimum necessary. Nothing about evenings by a fire discussing grain, tariffs, and border policy, and the accumulated administrative errors of a kingdom that had been making the same mistakes for 4 consecutive generations and calling it tradition. But there they were. He talked about the kingdom the way certain men talked about a difficult and beloved relative. With exhaustion, with genuine frustration, and with something underneath both of those things that was clearly care, even if he would have pushed back against that characterization if she'd offered it to him directly. She asked sharp questions, the kind that came from 16 years of being invisible in rooms where powerful people said things they believed no one important was listening to.
Had been listening.
She had been listening to all of it and filing it away in the specific, organized way of someone who understood that information was the only currency that didn't require a face or a name or a position. He noticed. The first time she pushed back substantively, not on a small point, but on something he was genuinely and consequentially wrong about. He went completely still. "You think I'm wrong?" he said. "I think you're right about the what," she said, "and wrong about the why." Silence. "The kind that could resolve in either direction and hadn't decided yet." "Explain," he said. "Not a request. Not a command either. Just, I'm listening. Give me something I can work with." "So," she explained. And he argued, because he was not the kind of man who accepted being wrong without examining it from every angle available to him first, which she respected even when it was inconvenient. They went back and forth across the fire for 40 minutes about grain policy in a province that neither of them had ever personally visited, and at the end of it he sat back in his chair and looked at the flames for a long moment, and said nothing. "The Eastern District Commissioner gets a letter tomorrow," he said finally, "changing the tariff schedule. Suspending it pending review." He paused. "Which is not the same thing as changing it." "Of course not. It's merely a review, naturally." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Very small. Almost not there at all. Almost a smile. The ghost of one. The suggestion of the possibility of one. Don't notice that, she told herself. She noticed it completely. She put it with everything else she was collecting. He brought a book one evening. Sat in the chair across from hers and read. She read too. They read in the same room in complete silence for 2 hours, and it was. She sat with the feeling, trying to find its name. Comfortable wasn't large enough. Safe wasn't specific enough. It was the feeling of being somewhere nothing was required of her, where existing was the only requirement, and she was meeting it. She had not felt that anywhere before. He fell asleep reading, the book slowly lowering, his head dropping slightly, and then asleep. Genuinely, completely asleep, the way people slept when they felt safe rather than when they were simply exhausted. She watched him sleep with the attention of someone who understood they were seeing something true. His face entirely different when he slept, the controlled blankness gone, replaced by just a man. angular jaw, long lashes against his cheekbones, the faint blue-gray at his temples that she kept returning to and couldn't name, cold, still, even sleeping, even in a warm room. His skin held that winter quality she was coming to know as specifically his, what is happening inside him. Because something was. She was more certain every day. Something he was managing alone, with considerable effort and telling absolutely no one. Not the council. Not Commander Stellan, who was clearly his most trusted person and clearly didn't know either. Based on the specific quality of careful blankness Stellan sometimes wore when watching the king across a room. The kind of blankness that was its own kind of worry. Something. Getting worse. She could see it in the way his hand sometimes moved briefly to his chest before he pulled it back. The way he stood at windows in the early morning with his face turned toward cold air as if he needed it the way other people needed warmth. The way the tremors she'd seen at 3 a.m. happened more frequently than they had 3 weeks ago. She put all of it somewhere for safe. She waited. She was becoming expert at waiting. 3 weeks into their marriage, she woke to find him at the window. He hadn't left, which was becoming a pattern. He'd been staying later and later. The previous week, he'd fallen asleep in the chair across from hers and woken at dawn with the expression of a man who had absolutely not intended to do that and was going to be very composed about it. But this was different. He was sitting on the window seat with one hand pressed flat against the cold glass and his back to the room, and he was shaking. Not obviously, not dramatically, the kind of shaking you missed if you weren't watching carefully. A slight tremor in the hand, the shoulders set with the overcorrected care of someone using significant force to hold something in. The quality of controlled tension in every line of him. His breathing, she could hear it from across the room, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow. Too deliberate. The breathing of someone who had made breathing a task requiring conscious management rather than a thing that simply happened. She watched him for a moment. He had no idea she was awake. He was completely alone in whatever this was. She understood that aloneness. The specific texture of 3 a.m. when you're fighting something you can't explain to anyone and don't know how. She got up quietly, not toward him. Toward the fireplace, added 2 logs. Built the fire up until the room was genuinely warm, the kind of warmth you felt in your chest when you breathed in. Then she sat down on the floor near the window, not touching him, not close enough to demand acknowledgement. Just there. He went still. I woke up, she said, simply, offering nothing that required a response. A long pause. The fire, he said. His voice was different. Something had happened to it in the dark hours. It had gone low. She watched the flames. I tend it when it goes low. His hand came off the glass. The tremor was already slowing, the shoulders gradually settling. You should sleep, he said. You should too. I don't. A pause. Sleep well. Some nights, she nodded. Didn't push. Didn't ask. Didn't offer the sympathetic question that would require him to either lie or explain more than he was ready to explain. Because men who had spent their entire lives managing difficult things alone didn't respond well to being asked directly about the difficult things. They responded to being allowed to be in a room with another person, without that person making the room smaller by demanding something from them. She knew this. She had been that person. She sat by the fire. He stayed by the window. 20 minutes later, he moved to the chair across from hers and sat and said nothing, and the shaking was gone, and his breathing had settled, and he looked, not better, exactly, but less alone. There was a difference. She had started counting that difference. In the 2nd month, he began arriving before dinner, then in the afternoon on some days. He didn't explain the shift. He didn't acknowledge it. He simply showed up at different hours, and she simply let him in, and neither of them mentioned that the terms they'd signed said nothing about any of this. She was not complaining. And Stellan, Commander Stellan, who she'd seen at formal occasions and 3 times in corridors and once at a distance across the courtyard. Stellan watched her now when he thought she wasn't watching back. Not with hostility, with the specific focused assessment of a man who hadn't yet decided whether something was a risk or a resource and was still gathering information. She caught him at it once, looked at him directly. He looked away first. She put that with everything else. Lady Senna she found through the blind maids on a Wednesday. Or rather, asked about through the blind maids, carefully, using language that required several attempts to land correctly, about whether there was someone in the castle with particular knowledge about certain practical matters between married people. The blind maids exchanged a look she couldn't see but could absolutely feel in the quality of the silence that followed. Lady Senna arrived the next afternoon, late 40s, dark hair with silver running through it in a way that looked considered. Dressed with the specific intelligence of someone who understood the difference between expensive and well-chosen, and always came down firmly on the side of the latter. She looked at Wren, at the veil, at the posture, at the way Wren was holding her own hands in her lap, and understood several things simultaneously, Your Majesty, she said, warm, direct. No preamble, how may I help? Wren had prepared speeches, several of them, all beginning with reasonable framing about the succession and the importance of the heir and the purely practical nature of the inquiry. None of them came out. He keeps leaving, she said. Lady Senna waited after. He gets up and dresses in the dark and leaves. I understand the terms. I agreed to the terms. But, she stopped. I would like him to stay. Sometimes, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. What makes you think you're doing something wrong? Because he keeps leaving. Men like your husband, Senna said carefully, don't leave because something is wrong. They leave because staying feels too close to something they don't know how to want yet. She tilted her head slightly. The question isn't what you're doing wrong. The question is what would make staying feel less dangerous to him than leaving. Wren sat with that. He controls everything, she said. Every part of himself, every room he walks into, every conversation. Yes, so if I wanted him to stay, you'd need to find the edge of it, Senna said. The place where holding on costs more than letting go, and how does one find that? Lady Senna smiled. The smile of someone who has 17 years of hard-won expertise and no apologies about any of it. Let me tell you, she said. That night Wren put everything she'd learned to use. She was bolder, more certain about the certainty. She paid attention in ways she hadn't before, adjusted, paid more attention. She was thorough about it in the way she was thorough about everything. Aldrich made sounds she had never heard from him before. Sounds that had very little to do with control. Where did you? He started. Research, she said, a pause. You researched. I take my responsibility seriously, a longer pause. And then, real, completely unmanaged, escaped before he could catch it, he laughed, just briefly. A short, genuine exhale of amusement. There and gone. She put it in the collection. He stayed that night. Not by accident. Not by falling asleep in a chair. He stayed with the deliberateness of someone making a choice and knowing they were making it, the settling of a decision. His arm came around her waist in a way that said, I am doing this intentionally. She lay very still, barely breathing, delighted in a way that had no appropriate scale to measure against. He came back the next night, and the one after, and the one after that. The contract was becoming increasingly theoretical as a governing document. Neither of them mentioned this. They had both identified something good happening and had mutually decided not to examine it directly. One night he arrived pale, not his usual cool-toned pale, drained pale, the color of someone who had been fighting something all day and was still fighting it. He sat by the fire without speaking, his hand moved toward his chest. Briefly, caught, pulled back before it arrived, and she thought, it's worse than it was. Tell me something, he said. Redirecting, not evading. She'd learned the difference, so she told him about a book, about trade routes from 2 centuries ago, about a mountain junction that had once been a major way station and was now just a name on maps that nobody unfolded anymore. She talked. He listened. The color returned to his face by degrees. His hand stayed in his lap, the way station, he said when she finished. There's still a stone structure there. Surveyors say it's standing. Could it be rebuilt? It would cost, against the cost of adding 3 days to every northern shipment on the current route. The math works. It's always worked. The council objected on precedent. What precedent? That we don't use that route. Because we don't use it, he looked at her. That's the entire precedent. That's not a precedent. That's a habit. Yes, he said. It is. He stayed late. They talked about the way station and a water rights dispute in the south, and then about beekeeping, which had nothing to do with anything except that he'd read about it and wanted to know whether he'd find it interesting. He found it interesting. He had opinions that were specific and unexpected, and she was going to be thinking about them for days. When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the fireplace, added a log without being asked. The automatic action of someone who has decided a thing belongs to their responsibility now. Good night, he said. Good night. Aldrich. He stopped at the door, didn't turn. But she could see, from across the room, the shift in his shoulders. The small release of something held, then he was gone. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning. She spent 4 days thinking about it in the careful, organized way she thought about everything. Then one day just being with it, the way you are with something that is simultaneously exactly what you agreed to and nothing like what you expected, that evening. 3 knocks. Come in, I have news, she said. He looked up. I'm pregnant. The silence had a different quality than his usual silences. Real-time calculation giving way to something that wasn't calculation. He crossed the room, his hand, cold, always cold, settled on her stomach with the care of someone touching something they'd stopped expecting. You're certain? The healer confirmed it this morning. His hand stayed. The joy in his face was unmanaged, not performed. Not relief at succession relief. Something real and unprepared, arriving before he could catch it. He pulled her close and held her with his chin at her temple and said nothing more for a long moment. His arms around her, his cold hands warming slowly against her sides. Thank you, he murmured into her hair. Her throat went tight. Don't, she told herself. Don't mistake this for something the terms don't include. His arms didn't loosen. She stopped arguing for now. After that, the edges of everything shifted. He asked about the pregnancy with the careful casualness of a man who had many questions and had decided that distributing them across time was less alarming than asking them all at once. What did she need? Was she eating properly? Had she seen the room on the 3rd floor that caught the afternoon sun? She went to see the room, perfect, south-facing, warm even at the deepest point of winter. A fireplace that drew better than the one in her suite, and a view of the garden that was going to be extraordinary when spring arrived. How long have you known about this room? She asked that evening. 17 years, he said. She looked at him. I grew up here, he said. Factual, not defensive. I know where all the good rooms are, and you mentioned it now because it seemed relevant, that almost smile. Gone before she could be certain. The sun helps, he said quietly. With various things. She filed it with the window and the cold and the tremors and the hand that moved to his chest. She was building a picture of him, piece by piece, and the picture kept suggesting something she didn't have a name for yet. 7 months in, he arrived one evening looking worse than she'd ever seen him. That drained pallor, that specific quality of someone losing an internal argument. She built the fire up past comfortable into genuinely warm, then sat back down with her book. Let him be. 20 minutes. The cold is worse, he said. Not looking at her, she looked at him. Some days I manage it, each word selected with visible care. Other days it takes everything I have. What is it? What's causing it? A very long pause. It's a family condition, he said, flat. A door closing. She let it close. She went back to her book. An hour later the color was back, and he was himself again. I've been thinking about the witch ban, he said. She went very still. My grandfather had his reasons. But the practical result has been 40 years of losing capability. We're now trying to replace without any good way to do it. He looked at the fire. The ban looks less like a considered policy and more like a decision made in anger and maintained by inertia. Like the way station, she said. Exactly like the way station. She breathed carefully. Because she knew what was under her veil. The brand, the designation. She was exactly what his kingdom had spent 40 years deciding to fear. She said nothing more about witches. That night, after he didn't leave, she felt the moment he could have. The small shift in his stillness. The point where he usually moved. And then he didn't. He stayed, and his arm came around her, and his breath evened into sleep with the unhurried certainty of a decision made. She lay awake, because this was the thing she hadn't let herself want. The thing she'd put under not part of the terms and don't mistake it for something it isn't. This wasn't cold. His arm was real. His breathing was real. He had decided, without saying so, that this was where he was. I'm in trouble, she thought. Not afraid trouble. The trouble of realizing that the careful walls around the soft parts of yourself have been quietly, thoroughly, systematically taken apart by someone who never announced what they were doing. She thought, I'll deal with this in the morning. She didn't deal with it in the morning. Or any morning after. She collected everything and didn't examine it, and was afraid of what she'd find if she looked directly at it. Kale arrived on a Sunday, healthy. Furious. announcing himself to the entire East Wing with the complete outrage of someone who had been very comfortable and was now very not comfortable and wanted the record to reflect this immediately and permanently. Wren wept when she heard him cry, not from pain, from the specific emotion of holding something real that you had only believed in theoretically until this exact moment. The thing that had only been an idea becoming, suddenly, undeniably itself. The midwife brought him to her. Small and red and violently displeased with existence in general, she looked at him for a long time, then Aldrich was there. She hadn't heard him come in, he was simply there, standing at the bedside, looking at KL with an expression she had never seen on him before, completely unguarded. Nothing managed, nothing controlled. Wonder, terror, something enormous and immediate that he had absolutely no framework for. The look of a man encountering something that had been theoretically real for months and was now undeniably, actually real, loathe. That was what it was. She could see it plainly and completely. "Hello," he said softly, to Kale. The same voice he'd used months ago when he'd pressed his hand to her stomach and felt the first movement. Kale responded with sounds that suggested he had opinions about everything. Aldrich looked at Wren. Yes, she said. "He's very small. He'll get bigger, he looks like you," she said. "He has your jaw." Something moved across his face. Too fast, too much to name. She looked at this man, 34 years of managing everything, containing everything, allowing himself nothing he couldn't account for, and she thought of cold windows and a strip of black silk and arms that stayed when they could have left. And she said it. Not a decision. Just, it ran out of room. 8 months of accumulation, finally with nowhere to go but out. "I love you," she said. Quiet. Like something that had been true for a while and was finally being said out loud. Aldrich looked at her. His face, for the first time fully, without management of any kind, showed her everything, what he felt, what he'd been containing, what he'd been fighting without knowing exactly what he was fighting. He started. "Don't," she thought suddenly, with the specific panic of realizing something too late. "Don't say it. Don't." "I love you," he said, and then he fell, not gracefully. He staggered back, one hand flying to his chest, the color gone from his face like something had cut the connection. His knees hit the stone floor. She was out of the bed before she had decided to move. Aldrich. Frost. Real visible, branching frost spreading from under his palm, across the front of his shirt, growing, reaching. Like ice across a winter window, except the window was his chest and it was moving fast. Aldrich. "What is happening?" His voice came out wrong. "Too thin. There's someone help." Into the corridor. "Get the healer. There's no cure," he said. Barely audible. There never was one. She was on the floor with him. Her hands on his face. His skin cold in a way she had no reference for. Not his usual cold, not the winter cold she'd come to know as his, but something deeper. Something at the level of the thing that kept him alive. "Tell me what this is," she said. His eyes found hers. Through the veil. He'd always looked at the veil and she'd always known he was looking at her. "A curse," he said, "on every king of my line. Every king of Grayfen. Going back generations, his breath came shallow and effortful. We cannot love. If we fall in love, our hearts freeze. We die. That is what it does. That is what it has always done." The midwife was in the room. A servant from the corridor. Wren barely registered them. "Your ancestor," she said, wanted to ensure no king would ever be governed by emotion. His grip on her hand tightened. Weak, but real. He found a witch powerful enough to make it permanent. Bound it into the bloodline itself. And then he regretted it almost immediately, which is why witchcraft was banned. He blamed them for his own mistake. "You chose me because I thought I couldn't truly know someone I couldn't see." Quieter. Getting quieter. "I thought if I never saw your face, I'd never really know you. That not knowing your face meant not knowing you. That not knowing you meant being safe from the curse." His eyes closed briefly. Opened. "I was profoundly wrong about what knowing someone means." She pressed her forehead against his, both of them on the floor of the room where their son had just entered the world, still making his opinions loudly known from across the room. The frost spreading toward his heart. "Then I'm killing you," she said. "My loving you is what is doing this." No, the force in that one word surprised her. "You gave me the first real year of my life. I felt things I had been told were biologically impossible for me to feel. He stopped, breathed with effort, happy. "I was genuinely, actually happy. You did that. Whatever comes next, you did that. I won't let you die," she said. "Wren, I will not let you die." She pulled back, looked at him. And then she did the thing she had been building toward and fighting against for 8 months. She reached up and pulled the veil from her face. He saw her, for the first time, all of her. She watched his eyes move across her features and waited for the thing she had always waited for. The recoil, the revision of everything, the expression that said, "This changes everything, and not in a way that helps you." Aldrich looked at her the way he'd listened to her in the dark for 8 months, with full attention, with complete presence. As if seeing her was not a judgment to be rendered, but a fact to be received. "You're beautiful," he said. "Look higher," she said. "Look at my forehead." His eyes moved up, the brand, the cross-shaped mark, dangerous, bound, criminal. "Witch, I'm a fire witch," she said. "Sealed since I was 13 years old, I am exactly what your grandfather banned. Exactly what this crown has designated criminal for 40 years. She held his gaze. "Hate me. If you hate me enough, maybe it reverses. Maybe the curse lets go." His expression didn't change. "I killed a man," she said. "Or I may have. Garrett, the man my sister loved. He died in fire and I was there and I was angry and I don't know what happened in the middle of that night." She put all of it in front of him, everything she'd been carrying. "I am not safe. I am not what you thought I was. I am the thing you were supposed to be afraid of." Aldrich raised his hand, shaking, deliberate, and pressed his palm against her cheek. "Still cold. So cold, you put logs on my fire every night for 8 months, he said quietly. "That is what you are." The frost was still spreading. "I love you more," he said. "For showing me." Then his eyes closed. He went still. The only sound was Kale, small, furious, alive, making his feelings about all of it abundantly known. Wren looked at her husband on the floor, the frost moving slowly and steadily toward his heart. She was not going to let this be the end. She stood, turned to the midwife frozen in the doorway. "I need you," she said, "to find me a witch." 3 weeks, that was how long Aldrich had been lying still. 21 days, 504 hours. Wren had stopped counting at some point and then started again, because counting gave her something to do with the part of her brain that otherwise simply screamed continuously and without pause. The frost had spread from his chest to his shoulders, down his left arm to the elbow, across his collarbone in the branching patterns that looked almost intentional. The way ice always chose its paths, following some internal logic that looked like design. His lips were blue at the edges. Not always. Some hours closer to normal. But at the edges. The particular blue of something that was losing a slow argument with cold and had been losing it for long enough that the outcome was becoming clear. The healers came twice a day. Checked his pulse. Checked his breathing. Wrote things in their records with the careful attention of people who understood that the records might be examined later. Said words like stable and maintaining that meant absolutely nothing, because stable was not better, and maintaining was not the same as alive, and she had stopped pretending otherwise. Kale was 3 weeks old and had opinions about milk and warmth and the precise angle at which he was held. Wren found this clarifying in the specific way that something very small and immediate clarifies everything complicated. You have a child who needs feeding. You feed him. You have a husband who needs saving. You save him. Terrifying. But the simplicity was useful. The council meeting was Wednesday morning. She hadn't slept. She had changed Kale at 4 in the morning and fed him at 5 and sat by Aldrich's bed, watching the frost for an hour to confirm it. Hadn't moved, and then dressed and walked to the council chamber with the specific focus of someone who has simplified everything down to the next required action. 8 men around the table, various ages, universally uncomfortable expressions. Commander Stellan stood at the far end, his face doing the careful blankness she recognized as his version of deep concern. She sat at the head of the table, Aldrich's chair. Nobody suggested otherwise. Nobody was willing to be the one to suggest otherwise. "The healers can do nothing," she said. "No preamble. That's established. We're not here to discuss the healers. I need a witch brought to the castle." The silence changed quality immediately. "Your Majesty," Lord Pembry, oldest counselor, choosing his words in real time with visible effort. "The king's law explicitly prohibits." "The king is unconscious," she said, flat. "He cannot enforce his own law. I am Queen Regent while he is incapacitated, and I am telling you what I require. The precedent. My husband is dying." She looked at Pembry, then at each of them in turn, one by one, giving each man enough time to understand she was looking at him specifically. "The frost has reached his left shoulder. By the healer's estimate, it reaches his heart in 2 to 3 weeks. After that, she paused. I don't need to tell you what happens after that. Nobody said anything. There is a witch in the Aldenmere province, Stellan said from the far end, quiet, certain, as if he'd had the information prepared and had been waiting to determine whether it was time to give it. Her name is Maren, Earth Witch, discreet, capable. Ren looked at him. I've known about her for some time, he said. Not apologetic, just factual. She held his gaze for a moment. Send for her, she said. Today, she stood. Walked out. Maren arrived that afternoon, small. Late 60s, gray hair, hands with decades of outdoor work in them. Brown wool, no ornamentation. A bag that looked like it belonged to a country doctor who had seen everything and stopped being impressed by any of it. She walked into Aldrich's chamber, set the bag down, and examined him with the focused efficiency of someone who had seen many difficult things and had learned to skip straight to what mattered. She pressed her fingers to his chest, his wrist, the frost on his shoulder, closed her eyes for 30 seconds. Ice magic, she said. Curse, old and deep, rooted in bloodline, not just the individual. She looked at Ren. Family curse. Much harder to break. Can you break it? Against ice, fire is most effective. She picked up his hand, studied the frost. But you'd need significant fire magic. I'm Earth. My work doesn't move this kind of cold, Ren breathed. I'm a fire witch, she said. Maren went completely still. Sealed since I was 13, Ren said. But if the seal were broken... Maren turned and looked at her, the way very few people looked at her. All the way through. Let me see your hands, Maren said. Ren pulled off her gloves. Maren took her hands, turned them, pressed her thumbs to Ren's palms and went still. Who was your grandmother, she asked. The question came from a direction Ren hadn't expected. My father's mother, Ren said slowly. She died before I was born. I was told her name, Cress Vane. Why does, Maren made a sound, low, private. Like something she'd been carrying had just shifted. Cress was my cousin, she said quietly. We grew up together in the Eastern Hills. Before her husband discovered what she was, Ren stared at her. Your grandmother was a fire witch, Maren said, powerful. More powerful than almost anyone I've known. Her husband had her killed when he found out. Made it look like fever. Told everyone, including his own son, that she'd simply died. The room was very quiet. Her son, Ren said. Was my father? Yes, who spent my entire life telling me my magic came from my mother's infidelity. That I wasn't truly his. That my mother had. Your father carries the same bloodline, Maren said. The same gift. Smaller than Cress had. Smaller than you have. But present, she held Ren's gaze. He would have known. The moment his own power first manifested, he would have known exactly where it came from. Something cold moved through Ren that had nothing to do with Aldrich's curse. He sealed me, she said. Yes. When I was 13. The year Garrett died, her own voice sounded distant to her, the day after my magic first appeared. So when Garrett died in fire, you were already sealed, Maren said. Whatever fire killed that man. It wasn't yours, silence. Then whose, Ren said. Not a question, she already knew. She had always had all tells. She had simply never let herself finish the picture. Lord Casvin, who had fire magic and had hidden it for decades. Who had hated Garrett from the moment the man entered their lives. Not because Garrett was unworthy, because Garrett alive and in love with Isolde was an inconvenience. Because Garrett dead in fire with Ren standing nearby was 2 problems resolved at once. I need the seal broken, Ren said. Yes, Maren said, and then I need to find my father. She rode at dusk. Stellan was at the stable when she arrived, his horse already saddled, the expression of a man who had made a decision and wasn't in the mood for a conversation about it. She looked at him. I've known about the curse for 11 years, he said. She waited. I thought protecting him meant controlling his exposure to anything that could trigger it. Managing who he spent time with. What he allowed himself to feel, his jaw was tight in a way that suggested this was costing something to say. I thought I was keeping him alive, and he was alive the way a fire is alive when you've put a lid over it. He met her eyes. Not dying. But not burning either. Ren looked at him for a long moment. Come on then, she said. They rode. The Casvin estate was lit in the main hall when they arrived. A servant at the door tried to stop her. She walked past him with the certainty of someone who had run out of reasons to be careful about anything. Casvin was by the fireplace. Of course. Glass in his hand. The expression of a man who had been waiting for bad news and was not surprised to see it arrive, wearing his daughter's face. Isolde was in the corner, standing immediately when Ren entered, her face doing several things simultaneously. You, Casvin said, the old contempt, reflexive as breathing. You killed Garrett, Ren said. No preamble, no build-up. Just the sentence, set down in the room between them like something that had always been there and was tired of being ignored. Casvin's face didn't change, which told her everything. You sealed me the day after my magic first appeared, she said. Which means when Garrett died in fire, I was already sealed. Whatever burned him, it wasn't mine to use, Ren. Isolde's voice was unsteady. What are you? He has fire magic, Ren said, still looking at her father. He inherited it from his mother, our grandmother, who he arranged to have killed when he couldn't control what she was. And when Garrett was going to take Isolde away from the family, when Garrett became inconvenient, he used it. Silence. 2 birds, she said quietly. 1 fire. Casvin set his glass down with precise care. Garrett was a commoner, he said. He was going to ruin Isolde's prospects. He was going to love her, Isolde said. Her voice had gone very quiet, very still. That was what he was going to do. Casvin looked at his younger daughter with the expression of a man explaining something obvious. I did what was necessary, he said. For this family, you killed him, Isolde said. And you let everyone believe she did it. For 3 years, her voice broke in the middle and came back harder. You let me believe it. It was necessary. Stop! She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Stop saying that word. She crossed to the cabinet in the corner. Top drawer. A small wooden box. Dark wood brass latch. She walked to Ren and held it out without hesitation. The seal, she said. He keeps it here. I found it 2 years ago and didn't know what it was. I know now, Casvin moved. Stellan stepped in front of him. No words, no threat. Just there, between Casvin and the box. And 5 palace guards in the doorway who had, it turned out, been there the entire time. Casvin looked at all of it. His face did the calculation and arrived at an answer he didn't like. For the first time in her life, Ren watched her father understand that there was no remaining move. She took the box from Isolde. Thank you, she said. I'm sorry, Isolde said. Plain. Undefended. The words of someone who has understood something too late and is saying so without asking for anything in return. I'm sorry I believed him. I'm sorry it took. Later, Ren said, gently. Because she meant it. We'll talk later. When this is done, she turned toward the door, Ren, Casvin's voice. Behind her, she stopped. Didn't turn. A witch practicing magic in the palace, he said. Whatever protection you think the king gives you, the king, she said, is dying. Because he loved me. A pause. I'm going to fix that, and then we'll discuss what happens to you. She walked out into the cold night, breathed it and mounted. Rode. Maren worked for an hour and 40 minutes. Ren sat very still throughout. Which was harder than anything she'd done in her life so far, including everything that had come before this. Because sitting still, while something that had been sealed into your bones for 13 years is being taken apart, requires a trust she had not easily given to anyone. She gave it to Maren, completely. Because there was no other option, and because she had decided, and she didn't go back on decisions. It didn't hurt exactly, more like sound. A vibration below the range of hearing, felt in the chest rather than the ears. Layer by layer, something loosening. Like a fist that has been held for so long it has forgotten that open is an option. Like fingers uncurling one by one from something they didn't know they were still holding. She thought of 13-year-old Ren, standing in her father's study while a stranger did something she didn't understand to the thing inside her that had just woken up. Holding herself still because she'd learned that stillness was safer than fighting. Putting it away. Adding it to the collection. She'd been putting things away her entire life. It was time to use them instead. Maren pressed her palms flat against Ren's sternum and said, Now, the last layer broke. Not an explosion. Not the dramatic release of something long suppressed. More like the first breath after being held underwater. The gasp of returning to something that was always yours. The specific shock of belonging to yourself again after a very long time of not being allowed to. Heat flooded through her, from the center outward, to her hands, her feet, the tips of her ears. Not burning, just warm, uncontainable, real. The warmth of something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for permission. She looked at her hands. A small flame on her left palm, just a small one. Patient. Like it had been waiting for 13 years and had very good patience about the wait. Hello, she said to it. It flickered. 20 minutes, Maren said. Breathe. Before the effort makes me useless. Don't waste them. Ren looked at Aldrich. She crossed to the bed, sat on the edge, put both hands, palms flat, heat building, against the frost on his chest. The cold hit her like a wall, not Aldrich's personal cold, the cold she knew, the cold of the curse itself, ancient, concentrated, designed by someone a long time ago to last forever and succeeding at that intention. Well, she thought. So was I. She pushed, not force. Not the way you push against a physical object, more like conversation. Heat meeting cold, introducing itself, finding the edges of the frost, the places where it had taken deepest root and saying, "Here, I'm here now. You can let go." It didn't work immediately. Of course it didn't. She sat with both hands on his chest and pulled warmth through him the way she'd been pushing warmth into this specific person for 8 months. Through every conversation, every evening, every log she'd added to his fire before he woke up and saw her doing it, she knew how. She had been practicing without knowing that was what she was doing. The frost resisted, held, tried to reassert where she'd already reached. It was old and deep, and it did not take the intrusion kindly. She didn't stop. She thought about the first night in the dark. His cold hands so careful on her shoulders. The patience of a man who understood that patience was the most useful thing he could offer. She could be patient too. She could be patient too. She thought about 3 in the morning and a window and a man who had been fighting something alone his entire life. And her, sitting on the floor nearby, not asking, just being there. Making it slightly less alone, she thought about grain policy and beekeeping and a baby moving under his hand in the dark. She pushed warmth into him like she was telling him a story. "Here," she said, without words. "Here, I'm here, you can come back now." The frost retreated, slowly, inch by inch, the branches thinning, the spread reversing. Like ice in April, not sudden, not dramatic. Just the long, inevitable work of warmth, doing what warmth always does when given enough time and enough intention. Her arms shook. Her hands were damp. The flame on her palm had dropped to almost nothing. She did not stop. "Come back and argue with me about the Eastern District. Come back and add logs to my fire and fall asleep reading. And pretend you didn't mean to. Come back and be there when Cale asks his first question, and both of us need to be there to answer it. Come back." The last of the frost on his chest cracked, and then it was gone. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in temperature. The cold pulling inward, concentrating, and then releasing. Something exhaled after a very long time. The room fractionally warmer, the air less tight. His chest rose, fully, deeply. The rise of real breathing, not the shallow maintenance of a body keeping itself minimally alive. A breath that went all the way in and all the way out. The way breathing was supposed to work. His color moved. Slowly, not instantly. From the blue-white of deep cold toward something that had warmth in it. To the gray receding. The faint gold of a living person returning under his skin by degrees. Ren sat with both hands still on his chest and her arms shaking and thought, "Don't cry. Not yet. Wait until you know." His eyelids moved. She stopped breathing, moved again. The flutter of someone fighting upward through significant depth toward the surface. Then they opened gray. Winter sky gray, but present, focused. Looking at the ceiling for one disoriented second before moving. "Finding her, Ren," he said. His voice raw with 3 weeks of disuse, but certain. Landing on her name the way it always did, like he'd been saying it for years. "Yes," she said. He looked at her face, no veil, the brand on her forehead, everything visible. The way it had been since the night Cale was born. "You look terrible," he said. She laughed, completely broken, wet, entirely undignified. The laugh of someone who has been holding too many things for too long and has finally been given permission to set them down. "You've been unconscious for 3 weeks," she said. "You look considerably worse. That's..." He tried to sit up. Made approximately 3 inches before she put a hand on his chest. He stopped immediately. "Fair," he finished. His hand came up and covered hers. Still cool, not cold. The coolness of someone returning from somewhere very far away. His fingers closed around hers with the grip of a man confirming that something real was there, that the thing he was touching was actually there. "The curse," he said, "broken." "How?" "I'm a fire witch," she said. "In case that had slipped your mind." It didn't slip my mind. His thumb moved against her hand. The slow movement she knew from the dark when he was thinking. "Ren, yes, Cale, sleeping, healthy. He has your jaw and my temper, which is going to create significant challenges for both of us as he gets older." Something moved across his face. Full and completely unmanaged. The thing she'd seen when he first held his son. I need to see him, he said. Tomorrow, Wren, tomorrow, she said, firm, clear. You've been frozen for 3 weeks. You can wait 12 more hours. He looked at her. She looked back. You're going to be difficult about this, he said. I have been difficult about things for 26 years, she said. I am very accomplished at it, not almost a smile. Actual smile, small and real and entirely his. The one she'd been collecting pieces of for months. Yes, he said. You are. His eyes closed, his hand didn't let go of hers. She sat in the chair by his bed and held hand and watched him sleep. Real sleep, warm sleep, the sleep of someone returning from somewhere far away. And finally let the tears she'd been holding for 3 weeks do what they needed to do. Nobody was there to see it. Maren had gone. The servants waved off, just the two of them in the fire she'd built up before she sat down. Some habits had stuck. She intended to keep them. 3 months. That was what real recovery took. Not clean. Not linear. Some days forward, some days sideways. Occasional days that felt like backward and turned out to be the body rerouting itself around what had been damaged. Aldrich was a difficult patient. Nobody who knew him was surprised. He wanted council meetings by the end of the first week. She blocked it. The Eastern District Commissioner waited 3 weeks while you were frozen. He can wait 1 more, the trade review, is being managed by Stellan competently. As it has been for 11 years. A pause. You've become very comfortable telling me what to do, he said. You've become very comfortable listening, she said. I didn't want to disrupt the pattern. He looked at her for a moment. I owe Stellan a conversation, he said. Quieter. The shift from arguing to something underneath. Yes, she said. You do. The conversation happened at the end of the 2nd week. She heard the shape of it afterward, from Aldrich by the fire. In the way he talked when he was telling her something true rather than reporting it. Stellan had known about the curse for 11 years. Had spent 11 years managing Aldrich's exposure, making sure no one got close. Controlling, with the best intentions available to a loyal man, who Aldrich was allowed to know. He thought he was keeping you safe, Wren said. He was keeping me contained, Aldrich said. There's a difference, a pause. He knows that now. What did you say to him? That every year I lived like that was a year I was alive but not living. That those were different things. That I'd rather have 1 year of actually living than 50 of the alternative. He looked at the fire. He cried. I've known Stellan for 15 years. I have never seen him cry before. People do, Wren said. When they realized something cost more than they intended to charge, Stellan stayed. New terms. He would tell Aldrich things, all things, no omissions, no protective management. He'd said that was easier to promise than Aldrich might think. That he'd been waiting years to be asked. Wren thought about how long people waited to be asked. Casvin was tried in the 4th week. She attended. Sat at the side of the chamber in a chair no one was going to ask her to vacate. Watched with the patient, focused attention she applied to everything. Isolde sat 3 chairs down and gave testimony that made everything coherent. The box, the timing, 3 years of arithmetic she'd refused to finish until now. Finishing it in front of everyone, Casvin sat throughout with correct posture and a composed expression. The portrait of a reasonable man. The performance he'd given his entire life. It didn't serve him now. When the verdict came, Wren looked at her father's face for whatever was underneath the performance. The fear, the shame, the regret. Whatever was actually there, she didn't find it. Maybe it wasn't there. Maybe some people were exactly as hollow as they appeared, and looking for depth in them was the mistake. The thing you kept doing because you couldn't accept that someone who was supposed to love you was simply empty where that capacity should have been. She looked at him for a long moment, then looked away, and didn't look back again. The witch ban came down at the end of the 2nd month. Aldrich signed it with 7 witnesses present, and the expression of a man signing something he should have signed 10 years ago and was not going to dwell on the gap between when he should have and when he did. Wren stood beside him. Didn't prompt, didn't manage, just stood there. He signed. Set down the pen, a regulatory structure, he said to the council. Registered practice, oversight, accountability, not a reversal of policy. An evolution of it, Pembry nodded. Nobody argued. There was a quality to that silence. Not people holding back, but people recognizing something was right, even when it complicated things they'd thought were settled. Wren caught Maren's eye across the room. The old witch gave her a look that communicated an entire paragraph in a single second. She gave one back. Isolde came to the castle on a Thursday with a folder of documents and the expression of someone who had thought carefully about what they were doing and decided to do it anyway. A framework for the regulatory structure. Dense, careful research. The work of someone who needed to be useful and had found a way to be. This is good, Ren said. First page. Second page. It's a start. It's more than a start. You should present it to the council. I'm not. You did the work. Do you want credit for it or not? A silence. Yes, Isolde said. I want credit for it. Then present it. I'll arrange it. Something loosened in Isolde's face. The release of someone who has been braced for a very long time and is finally allowed to stop. I'm sorry, she said. Plain. I know I said it before. I'm saying it again. I know, Ren said. Is it enough? Is there? It's enough to start, Ren said. Honestly. The rest takes time. Isolde nodded. Not a complete answer. The true one. They both knew the difference. Lady Voss came 2 weeks before the end of the 3rd month. A decade as Aldrich's senior advisor. Always near him at formal occasions. Always watching the room's edges. Ren had noted her months ago. Put her with everything else. Waited. She knocked. Entered with a letter of resignation. He offered me the option, she said. I'm accepting it. Why? Ren asked. Because I spent 11 years deciding what he needed. What he should know. Who should be near him. What was safe. She looked at the fire. I told myself it was loyalty. It was control in a better coat. You could stay, Ren said. Under different terms. Voss looked at her. The terms matter, Ren said. If the terms are right, the person is still useful. The question is whether you can work in a situation where you don't control what he knows. A long silence. I don't know, Voss said. I've never tried. That's more useful than yes. At the door she stopped without turning. He's different since you, she said. In ways I couldn't have predicted. I didn't think it was possible. Someone changing the fundamental thing about him. A pause. I was wrong about that. She left. Ren sat with that for a long time. The last morning of the 3rd month. She was in the courtyard before anyone else. She stood in the stone space with the winter air on her face. Her face uncovered, unhidden, entirely and permanently hers, and let the warmth build in her palms the way it wanted to. Small flames, candle-sized, comfortable. Hers in a way they had never been allowed to be before. She'd been practicing with Marin every day, learning the difference between fire as something that happened to her and fire as something she chose. The magic knew what it was. It had always known. It had simply been waiting for permission. She heard footsteps, Aldrich. She knew his walk by now, the deliberate, unhurried quality of it. She had known it for months before she knew it. He sat on the low wall at the edge of the courtyard. Not behind her, beside, close enough to be real, far enough to give her the space she was standing in, the way he'd always positioned himself. Close enough to matter, far enough to leave her room. She let the flames grow a little. He watched without comment. After a while, she sat beside him. They looked at the garden. Still mostly winter, but at the edges, small green things. The beginning of the year turning, the way it always did, indifferent to whatever had happened in the months before. Patient in its own way. Knowing what it was and knowing it would come back, Cale said something yesterday, Aldrich said. She looked at him. Not a word exactly, but deliberate. He was looking at me and he made a sound with clear intent. He paused. Marin says he's early for that. For the vocalizations, he has opinions, Ren said. He comes by it naturally. From which parent? Both, she said. Which is going to be a challenge. He was quiet for a moment. The Eastern District settlement came through, he said. The way station reconstruction is approved. They broke ground last week. Good. The Witch Registry has its first 12 registrations. Marin is heading the oversight panel. Also good. Isolde's framework is being used as a model in 3 other districts. She'll be insufferable about it, Ren said. In the absolute best possible way, probably. He looked at the garden. She looked at his hands on his knee. Still cooler than most people's hands. Not cold. Not the cold of something wrong. Just the temperature of a man who ran a degree or 2 on the cooler side, which was unusual but was no longer alarming. Was simply one of the specific, particular things that were true about him. Just him. I've been thinking about the contract, he said. She gave him her full attention. Not with fear. With the specific quality of knowing this was important. The original terms were inadequate, he said. Yes, she said. They were. I want to revise them. She looked at him. He looked back. Specifically, he said, the part about wanting nothing to do with you beyond what was necessary. A pause. I'd like to remove that clause. Just that clause, and the one about 3 to 4 royal functions per year. What would you replace them with? He looked at the garden for a moment. Nothing, he said. That's the point. No terms about when you can be around. No schedule. No designated occasions with designated purposes. He paused. Just, she said. Yes, he said. Just. She looked at the flames in her palms, small and warm and completely, finally hers. She thought about a mating auction in a cold hall. A man who had walked in and stopped in front of her and said 3 words that changed everything. Not for the reasons she'd understood then, and not for the reasons he'd intended then, but for the reasons things actually happened, which rarely matched the intentions on either side, and occasionally, improbably, managed to be better than either of them planned. She closed her hands, the flames went out. She opened them. They came back. All right, she said. He didn't say anything else. Neither did she. Everything that needed sayings had been said, in the dark and in firelight and in the slow, accumulating way that 2 people learn each other over months without noticing it's happening until it's already done. Kale's voice reached them from inside the castle. Not words yet. The confident, entirely certain sound of someone who had a great deal to say and was working out the mechanics of saying it. They both heard it. They both moved, together, not planned. The automatic response of 2 people who had built something real enough that the same things moved them in the same direction at the same moment without either of them deciding to. That was it, Wren thought. That was the word she'd been looking for. Not cold, not warmth, not the formal terms of a contract, or the desperate terms of a mating auction, or the carefully managed terms of a man who had believed he could outthink a curse by never letting anyone close enough to trigger it. Just this. 2 people moving in the same direction, at the same time, because something had been built between them that was real enough to make that happen automatically, without discussion, without planning, without any of the careful management that both of them had spent their lives relying on instead of this. The morning ahead of them, the child who had something to say, the fire in her hands. Finally, completely, unmistakably hers. She followed him inside.